Game of Thrones, The Long Night. The Battle of Winterfell. The air above Winterfell was thick with frost and dread. The silence before the storm was almost unbearable. Snowflakes danced lazily in the pale moonlight, and the breath of thousands turned to mist as they waited for the arrival of death itself. For nights they had prepared, knowing this was not just another war. This was the war for the very survival of mankind. Daenerys Targaryen stood upon the ramparts beside Jon Snow. Both gazed into the northern darkness, where no light shone beyond the flickering torches of their army. Behind them stretched an uneasy alliance. Unsullied, Dothraki, Northmen, Knights of the Vale, and what remained of the free folk. Dragons rested beyond the walls, their hot breath melting the snow around them. Rhaegal and Drogon, restless, sensing the cold, unnatural enemy that drew closer. And below, the living waited. The betrayal of the South. Far to the south, in King's Landing, Cersei Lannister watched the flames burn in her great hall. She had promised men, aid, and gold, but her promises were smoke. She had no intention of sending her armies north. While others fought and died against the Night King, she would conserve her strength, waiting to seize what remained of the shattered world. To her, this war was not her concern. The North would burn, Daenerys would fall, and then the Iron Throne would once again be hers alone. "Let the monsters kill each other," she had told Jaime. But Jaime had left her, disgusted, broken by her cruelty. He rode north, knowing that honor demanded it. Cersei's betrayal left the defenders of Winterfell alone against the darkness. The preparation. In Winterfell's courtyard, the final preparations were frantic but resolute. Arya Stark sharpened her dragon-glass dagger, her face calm and cold. Sansa Stark organized the evacuation of the crypts, ensuring the weak and the children were safe below. Samwell Tarly fumbled with his armor, his shaking hands gripping the hilt of Heartsbane, the ancestral Valyrian sword of House Tarly. Brienne of Tarth led the Knights of the Vale to their positions at the western flank. Beside her stood Jaime Lannister, fighting now not for his house but for redemption. The Hound grumbled at the cold, pretending not to care. But when Arya passed him, their eyes met briefly. There was something like respect there. At the center of the formation, the Unsullied stood like a wall of stone, unflinching, faces blank. Grey Worm moved among them, silent and steady. Behind them waited the Dothraki, restless, fierce, and unafraid. Their curved araks gleamed with dragon glass, and at their head sat Jorah Mormont, loyal to the end. Ghost prowled beside Jon, growling at the unseen enemy. Melisandre, the Red Woman, appeared out of the shadows, her eyes burning like coals. "Lift your swords," she commanded softly, and the Dothraki obeyed. Whispering in the language of the Lord of Light, she ignited every Dothraki blade in a wave of living fire. Thousands of flaming araks burst to life, casting a sea of orange against the black horizon. For a heartbeat, hope flickered. And then the darkness came. The first charge. The Dothraki screamed their war cries and rode forward, a tide of fire and fury. From the battlements, Daenerys watched with pride and fear as their flaming blades surged into the night. The sound of hooves thundered across the frozen plain, and then, one by one, the lights began to die. No screams, no flashes of combat, just the extinguishing of flames, swallowed by endless dark. A cold horror swept over the defenders. The Dothraki had vanished. Moments later, a few terrified horses returned, their riders gone. Then came the silence again, until the first wave of the dead struck the Unsullied like a flood. The onslaught of death. The whites crashed against the line, clawing, biting, tearing with mindless fury. The Unsullied held, their spears stabbing into rotting flesh, but the sheer weight of numbers drove them back. Flaming trenches were lit, creating circles of fire to slow the enemy. But still, they came. Every man killed rose again moments later to fight against his brothers. Above, Daenerys and Jon mounted their dragons, soaring into the storm. From the skies, they unleashed fire upon the dead, carving rivers of flame through their ranks. But the Night King was ready. Upon his undead dragon, Viserion, he appeared from the blizzard, his ice-blue eyes blazing. Fire met frost as dragons collided in the sky, their roars shaking the heavens. Below, chaos ruled. The living were dying faster than they could retreat. Sam stumbled and fell, only to be saved by Ed Tollett, who was then torn apart moments later. Brienne shouted for her men to fall back, her armor dented and bloody. Jaime fought beside her, the Kingslayer now defending a queen's honor of a different kind. Bran and the Night King. In the Godswood, Bran Stark waited. The cold there was deeper than anywhere else. He sat beneath the ancient weirwood, his eyes clouded white as his mind roamed through ravens above the battlefield. Theon Greyjoy and a small group of Ironborn guarded him, knowing full well they would not survive the night. Through the eyes of the ravens, Bran saw the tide of death, and the Night King himself, slowly advancing toward Winterfell. His army stretched for miles, a frozen sea of corpses. Bran felt no fear, only inevitability. He had seen this moment before. It was the culmination of everything. The fall of the living inside the castle. Even the crypts were no longer safe. The dead buried beneath Winterfell began to rise, clawing out of the stone, attacking those who had sought refuge. Sansa and Tyrion fought side by side, armed with daggers of dragonglass, their faces pale but determined. Jon and Daenerys circled the battlefield, desperate to reach the Night King. But when Jon landed to fight on foot, Rhaegal crashed in agony, his body torn by the undead dragon. Daenerys dismounted to protect Jorah, who fought like a lion to defend her against waves of whites. His blade cut down dozens. But when he finally fell, bleeding and broken, Daenerys screamed, tears mixing with the snow. Above the Godswood, the blizzard cleared. The Night King arrived. The final confrontation. Theon and his men stood their ground bravely. Arrow after arrow flew, each felling a white, but it was not enough. One by one, they fell until only Theon remained. He looked at Bran, the boy he had betrayed, the man he now died to protect. "You're a good man, Theon," Bran said softly. Theon smiled through tears, charged the Night King, and was impaled instantly. The Night King advanced, his steps slow and deliberate. Bran stared at him calmly, seeing through the eyes of time itself. When the Night King raised his blade to strike, a whisper of movement came from behind. Arya Stark flew from the shadows, her face cold as steel. The Night King turned, his icy hand shooting out to grab her by the throat. Her knife dropped, only for her other hand to catch it mid-fall. A flash of dragonglass, and then silence. The Night King shattered into 1,000 shards of ice. The dawn after the long night. The storm ended. The wind died. The sun rose weakly over Winterfell, its first rays touching the broken walls and the blood-soaked snow. The army of the dead collapsed into dust, their threat gone forever. Daenerys wept beside Jorah's body. Jon stood beside the remains of Rhaegal. The survivors, few and broken, looked upon each other not as lords or soldiers, but as living souls who had faced death itself. From the ashes of the longest night, the world was reborn. Epilogue. Cersei's betrayal had left scars that would soon ignite new wars, but in that brief moment after victory, the living breathed again. Arya, the assassin who killed death itself. Bran, the boy who became the memory of the world. Jon, the man who united the living. Daenerys, the queen who had seen her dragons burn the night away. Winter had come, and winter had passed. The song of ice and fire played on. The north waited for the end of the world. Snow fell without pause. The sky darkened long before sunset, and the wind howled through the trees like a dirge for the living. On the walls of Winterfell stood thousands, men and women who had never fought side by side, but now faced death together. The Dothraki, fearless horsemen of the East, the Unsullied, soldiers of perfect discipline, the free folk from beyond the wall, the knights of the North and the Vale, and above them all, Daenerys Targaryen, mother of dragons, her silver hair gleaming under the dim light of torches, her eyes filled with fire and fear. Beside her stood Jon Snow, the bastard of Winterfell, reborn as a king, ready to die as a man. They both watched the horizon, the dark line of the forest, beyond which something unnatural stirred. Death was coming, the betrayal in the south. Far to the south in the Red Keep, Queen Cersei Lannister stood on her balcony, holding a glass of red wine. She knew about the coming war. She knew the Night King was marching on the living, but she had no intention of lifting a finger to help. "Let them kill each other," she whispered with a smile. Her plan was simple and cruel. Wait until both sides were destroyed, then sweep in with the Golden Company and reclaim the realm in her name. So, while the North froze and bled, Cersei's armies remained in the warmth of King's Landing, untouched by snow or conscience. Before the storm, Melisandre arrived when all hope seemed lost. The Red Woman, a flame in human form. She walked through the snow, her eyes glowing faintly, and approached the ranks of the Dothraki. "Arashak I," she whispered. And suddenly, fire bloomed across the fields. Thousands of araks ignited with living flame, turning the night into a field of stars. The Dothraki roared, raised their burning blades, and charged into the darkness, a wave of light and fury. For a moment, hope flared, but then, one by one, those flames began to die. Screams echoed in the wind, and then, silence. The Dothraki, the fiercest riders in the world, were gone in less than a minute. The dead arrive. Then came the storm. The army of the dead hit the walls like a living tide, cold, endless, relentless. Jon and Daenerys took to the skies on their dragons, Rhaegal and Drogon, their fire carving through the night. The living fought desperately below. Brienne of Tarth, Jaime Lannister, Podrick, Samwell Tarly, all locked in the chaos of death. On the ground, Arya Stark moved like a ghost. Years of training with the Faceless Men had turned her into something more than human. She was death in motion, silent, swift, merciless, but even she was only one small flame against an ocean of darkness. The Weirwood and the Night King. Beneath the old god's tree, Bran Stark waited. His body sat motionless, but his mind flew through time and shadow. He saw the Night King's army as it moved, saw the blue eyes that pierced the snowstorm. He had seen this before, in visions, in dreams. And now it was happening. Theon Greyjoy stood guard, loyal to the end. When the whites broke through the trees, he and his men fought valiantly, their arrows glowing in the firelight. One by one, they fell, until only Theon remained, bloodied but unbroken. "You're a good man, Theon," Bran said softly. "Thank you." And with a cry, Theon charged the Night King. and fell to his blade. The moment of the end. The Night King walked toward Bran, slow and certain, his blue eyes calm, almost curious. Around them, the world had gone still. Even the dragons seemed to hold their breath. Daenerys, atop Drogon, screamed in rage, unleashing a torrent of dragonfire upon him. But when the smoke cleared, he still stood there, unharmed. He reached for his blade, to end everything. But then, a whisper in the wind, a blur of motion. Arya Stark leapt from the shadows, her dagger raised. The Night King turned, catching her by the throat. For a heartbeat, the world froze. Then, she dropped the blade from one hand to the other, and drove it into his chest. The dragon glass pierced his heart. The Night King shattered into ice and dust. All across the battlefield, his army collapsed, whites falling lifeless, giants crumbling, the dead returning to the stillness they'd escaped. After the dawn, when the sun rose, Winterfell was in ruins. Thousands lay dead, and smoke curled into the pale sky. Jon stood among the fallen, his eyes hollow. Daenerys wept beside the body of Jorah Mormont, her last true protector. Arya walked in silence, the weight of what she'd done heavy but unspoken. Bran sat beneath the weirwood, his gaze distant. He had seen it all, the end of the Night King and the beginning of something far darker. The long night was over. But the wars of the living had only just begun.